Hi, everyone. Welcome to the ninth episode of the Haleakalan podcast. Today we have Miss Yang. Miss Yang, do you mind giving like a brief introduction about yourself and just like talking about yourself for a quick second?
Sure. Yes. Hello, everybody. My name is Hua Szu Yang. I am currently a self-expression coach with a background in tech. So I worked in product management mostly for a bunch of that with stints in analytics and operations. And I'm really excited to be here.
Well, yeah. So I was actually browsing your LinkedIn and like I noticed that you were like into building GTM success at MobileIron. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like I was kind of interested, but I didn't really know like what to make of it.
Sure. There's a lot of jargon that goes on. GTM means go to market and is a term that has different meanings to different people, but is often used to refer to sales, marketing, everything that has to do with how do we get a product that has been built to actually making money from it. So to actually putting it in the hands of customers and making revenue. So what MobileIron does is it is an enterprise security company that helps companies to be able to secure employees access to corporate information and systems. And when I was working in go to market there, it was around specifically how do we become more data informed in the way that we go to market, and how do we create systems that allow for repeatable success. So this means that when we are targeting customers, how do we use data to help us know who are the right customers, when are the appropriate times to reach out to them and how, and then also to make sure that our salespeople, our product marketers, anyone who interfaces with a client in any way is empowered by a system that makes their work easier to do and makes them more able to respond to customers' needs in a very nimble way.
Okay. So this is all kind of like in that project management realm, from my understanding.
it it is also a very vague term in the industry what project management is, and I'm sure when you ask different people, people will have different ideas of it. So what my background is more product management, which it has some distinction to project management. It includes project management skills, which most jobs do to some extent, but I approach it more from the perspective of how do we make sure that our customers, whether they're internal or external, are having their needs met, and that we are helping to create a better experience for them as they go about their day-to-day work. Whereas perhaps if we limited to a project management view, it would be less, possibly it would be less in that perspective and more about there is a project and there's a timeline and I just need to get it done. So this is not about just delivering, it's about measuring based on how do we help the customer be able to be happy and successful.
So you seem very like you seem very informed on the product management side, right? So I wanted to ask, right, since we got you from Bill, who was very into mental health, how did you kind of transition to be a mental health advocate coming from a field of tech?
Right. I would say it was less of a transition and more of becoming aware that mental health advocacy has always been part of what I've been doing. So at all of my companies, I've always been very interested in organizational success and how to help people at all levels to be able to do their best work, which means that we need to create psychological safety in the workplace. And so outside of my written responsibilities, I've always taken it upon myself to see what else I can do to make sure that everyone in the team feels included and that they belong, because that is what enables everyone to feel comfortable putting forth their ideas and contributing to the team. And then I have had some experiences where I've done more intensive work in mental health, such as volunteering for a mental health hotline, doing a lot of study, learning from people like Bill so that I could understand the concepts and the terminology at a deeper level. And now I find that I focus a lot more specifically on mental health, but it draws on a lot of the lessons that I've developed throughout all of my jobs, like the attention to how people behave, what drives them, what makes someone interested in their work, what makes someone demotivated. All of these experiences have helped me to do what I do now.
Yeah. Okay. That's cool. Yeah. So Rohan mentioned that you kind of switched over from the tech side of things to mental health. So I was watching your podcast with Bill, and I noticed that you guys talked a little bit about like career flexibility. So like I was just wondering like what your advice is to people who like if they're split between different careers, like how do you suggest they could find like their interests and sort of make a choice?
There isn't a formula per se, and it is definitely a journey that takes a lot of exploration, introspection, and experimentation. So I would say to first dive a level deeper, like you're proposing the scenario in which someone has two paths that they're considering, is first to look a level deeper as to what about those two paths is enticing that person. So besides literally what the job functions are or what the company is, what does it mean day to day to do those jobs? What types of people would they be interacting with? What are the ways in which they would be challenged? What skills are they building? And then how does this person feel? What feelings does each of these aspects evoke in that person? So for that person individually, only they can define what success means to them. And for some people, success might involve they need to feel a sense of power from their job. For other people, maybe it's more important that they feel a sense of security and they meet different needs. So I would really think about going deep on what needs is that job fulfilling potentially, and then map that to for this person, for you internally, what are the needs that you're prioritizing, and then see which is a better fit in that case. And then the name of the game is experimentation. So are there ways that we can experience bits of each of these paths and then validate our assumptions that, oh, I thought this type of job would help me create this feeling that I care about having in my life. But when I actually tried a similar sort of work, that didn't happen. Why was that? And so with little experiments, we can start to gain insight as well.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense. So yeah, I think since we're on that like conversation about careers and all, um, when people are split between different career options, like they may think one is harder than the other, and like a lot of times when people want to choose, like people want to choose the easy path over the hard path. But I noticed in your podcast you said that like people may think something easy is not like worth their time or like valuable. So like do you think there's a limit to people consistently challenging and pushing themselves without them kind of like overloading?
That is an idea that really I have to thank Bill for raising, which is questioning the value of going easy or going hard, as people might call it, on themselves. And I would err on the side of our limits are rarely where we think they are. We often have assumptions beforehand of where they are, and then we try a new activity for the first time and we realize, oh, it was actually exciting, or I want to do more of this. And that breaks a certain assumption that we had before in our mind. So I that's what I would say to your point on limits. On the how much we can go without overloading ourselves, that's really a long-term mindset that we can consider, which is that we might overload ourselves on a given day, let's say, like not everyone, most people don't have very balanced days all 365 days of the year. There might be days when we stress ourselves out, but that's fine. We can have compassion for ourselves, and it's more about sustaining in the long term. So in a given year, most likely we don't want every single day in that year to be extremely stressful. And 24 hours in a day, we don't want all of those to be very stressful. So it's about thinking what is healthy in the long term, and how do we make sure that there is a diversity, that we have intentional space to rest and intentional space to push ourselves. And then there's also work of how do we change the way we push ourselves so that it is not equivalent to overloading. We can definitely challenge ourselves without it being breaking us down, right? When we train our mindset and when we set up the right way to push ourselves, the right way for us personally.
Yeah, I agree with that point. I wanted to ask like specifically about, I guess, about tech and you being like a woman in tech, right? I wanted to ask how is it? And also, does it add like any extra pressure on you and like the mental health implications with that?
The experience of a woman in tech can be very pluralistic. So my experience can be very different from another experience of a woman in tech. So I can only speak from my lived experience. And I would say I feel lucky that I have encountered people in different jobs who are extremely supportive, people who continue to be my mentors to this day, who are people who come from all walks of life and they look all different ways. And I recognize that there is pressure, like you are saying, where sometimes there have been times when I'm a woman in a meeting and there are no other women, or there are very few other women. And so it is probably a natural human behavior when we see that, to have this feeling of, well, now I'm representing all of women and I have to make sure I make zero mistakes, because I would not just be bringing myself down, but also be bringing potentially all women down. So that pressure exists, and we have made some progress, and there continues to be a lot of work that we need to do, especially in terms of what you said about the effects on mental health, is that there is this cognitive load that we're putting on, where in addition to performing at the job and performing in that meeting, for example, we have this additional consideration that is taking up space in our use of our energy. So that is a strain on mental health over time. And that's why we have so much work to be done in creating more equitable workplaces. And it's great that you chose to feature a woman in tech, and possibly you might feature more in the future. So you're on a great path.
Yeah, so what kind of steps as can like society or like specifically the STEM industry take to like encourage more women in tech and make the pressure a little lighter and have overall more exposure in communities that may not get access to tech and like may not be given the like experiences that like men, for example, might have been given.
I do not claim to be an expert on this. There are so many people that I look up to who have such great ideas on this. I'll bring up a few ideas I have read about and that I've been able to be part of discussions at my workplaces. One is having better policies around family leave. So especially for women who become mothers, making sure that in this country there are fair ways that they can be compensated and don't have to necessarily feel that weight of trading off their career for their family. And then also the other part is culturally, how do we have more open discussion that helps not only just women, but people from all marginalized groups? So when someone is struggling with mental health, how do we normalize talking about that at work? How do we normalize talking about being a mother or being a caretaker of any sort, being older versus other colleagues? So normalizing these conversations can be challenging for sure, but they also make it more real for people and help us to understand each other so that the decision makers are acting from a place not of just, oh, I've been told according to the latest human resources best practices that we need to instill these practices. That's very different than if someone really understands and has engaged with stories of real people in their workplace who face these challenges and then acts from that place of empathy. And then another aspect is that there are lots of organizations out there that are doing great work, whether it's an organization like Girls Who Code, who tries to educate girls from a young age, or organizations that are partnering with employers to make sure that they can, say, have better tracking of their application process so that they have numbers to guide their decisions. So there's so many organizations, and every company probably has, or at this point is building up people who have expertise on how do we identify the best organizations and technologies that can help us to proceed on this journey.
Yeah. Okay. That was a great answer. So kind of transitioning back to like the mental health part of this podcast is just like, I know you mentioned that you were like being a single, like a woman in a room full of men could be like very overwhelming. So in terms of like the workplace, maybe the workplace being overwhelming and like, or and just life in general, what do you suggest like people who like are trying to maintain a stable mental state but are kind of at rock bottom and like they feel helpless in term like yeah.
It depends a lot on exactly what is going on with them. So it's hard to, prescribe based on that description. But one start is to find ways to ask for help. And that can be extremely difficult when you do feel helpless. Like asking for help is a skill that many people actually can improve on, including myself. And I would say that there are different resources that are suited for different people and at different points. So it could be this person could be helped by a psychologist or a therapist or a coach or some combination of different professionals. It could be that there are aspects of their environment that are exacerbating their situation. And so that's where perhaps, social workers can also have an influence. And so it really takes a team, and the methods have to be tailored to what exactly is affecting this person and also what is effective for them. Like different people, sometimes even with the same problems or what looks like the same problems on the surface, can respond differently to different methods. So it really comes from a place of understanding exactly what is driving that sense of feeling at rock bottom and then finding the appropriate method.
So earlier you were talking about how like people needed to balance for mental health, right? People needed to balance their workload so that they're not overworking. I wanted to ask about your personal experience. Like, when did you realize that mental health was something important that you had to actually worry about in your life? And how did you cope with it yourself?
I consciously realized it several years ago, I would say, and it had to do with being really fortunate that I ran into people who were very thoughtful about this. So for instance, I joined a meditation community, and a bunch of the people in it were very thoughtful about how they nurture themselves and who they are. And it opened up so much education and further resources and experiments that I tried. And I would say that there have definitely been times when I, to use your word, overworked, and I have had experiences of feeling like my self-worth is related to my performance at work or related to what others perceive as my performance. And so some of these insecurities can make me overwork, where I feel like I have to always over deliver or else I am not worthy as a person. Or there have been times when I have had a habit of staying really long hours at work, at the office, and it felt like that was natural, like that's part of who I am and part of my identity. So it took years to be able to adjust that and to be able to connect on a deeper level to what are my values and what do I like, who are the people that I really care about? What is the experience that I want to have with these people? And how can I behave from a well-informed place about what really matters to me instead of just letting insecurities, for instance, drive my decisions. So and I continue to work on this. I expect that this will be a lifelong journey because we always get tested every time we feel that we are better in a certain dimension. That opens up space for us to consider potentially other dimensions in which we could continue to learn. But it's been very gratifying that there have been people in my life who I can have these conversations with, who support the idea that there are many different ways to be a great human or to be a human who is valued in society. So it helps to have friends and people who find that I am a joyful presence in their life, even if I am not overworking myself every day. Like those have been interesting observations to make, and then to help me be a partner to me in internalizing and acting out what really matters to me.
Yeah, so you're talking about how like the mental health aspect is really taxing in the tech industry. And I've experiences with people who've had like problems with overworking, layoffs, all that kind of stuff that really, especially in the tech industry, causes a lot of like mental health struggles. So besides like you talk about people who really helped you out, specific people, but what can like companies as a whole do to like release that burden, right? So like companies like Facebook, Google, they tried creating like communities where you can feel like safe and stuff, but like what more can you do to like release the burden that's on these workers?
I can see there being more work that helps people feel like they belong, which is on that range of what diversity work usually entails, right? People talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And it can be that a lot of companies are at a point where they are informed enough now to have practices and communities, like you said, that they have built, that in a lot of cases, not all, are really at a point of more inclusion so far. Like, sure, every meeting now has someone who represents this marginalized group, right? For some industries or companies, even that is not even reached yet. But it's a difference between that and actually making sure that person is feeling belonging. So they're not just present, but they feel they belong enough that they will show up as themselves and they will not hesitate to speak up. And in order to get across that gap, it means that we want to take the idea that there are many ways, there's no just one way to be a great employee. Like, we have to normalize that we can have pluralist values and behaviors, which is a really interesting concept that I learned from this organization called the Pop Culture Collaborative, which does a lot of work on equity. And I love the way that they've articulated it, which is that in a just society, we normalize that there are many ways to be a woman in tech, for instance. You don't have to be a woman and fit this mold in order to belong in a tech company. And so the more that we can release expectations that people fit a certain mold and instead be open and welcoming to how they choose to show up, then that frees people to be who they are.
One question I had was kind of, I guess, well, two of them. First, I wanted to ask, like, did you always want to be a woman in tech, like going into college, like in the later years of your high school? And also, what advice would you have for us aspiring college students? Like, especially, maybe people normally see this college admissions time as one of the more stressful periods of the high school. So what kind of advice would you have for us going into into our last year of college or high school and a couple of years of college?
I did not always have this idea of being a woman in tech. I transitioned into working in tech from working in finance. And I am really glad that I did, in the sense that I've gotten to learn different experiences and I've taken aspects from all of my jobs in all different industries, and they've all informed who I am today. As far as advice, I don't know that much about y'all yet. What are you interested in? Like, tell me a little bit more about what's on your mind, and I can give some more tailored advice. But before that, as overall, I would say is experiment, be open to new experiences, new people, like people who will help expand your worldview. And often people, right, late in their life, they report how they've done activities they never even imagined. So that's why that curiosity and following that openness is so useful.
Yeah. So from what you just said there, the overall advice kind of talks about like experimenting and just trying new things. But I know sometimes when you like experiment and just try things for the first time, like you could fail like miserably. And I searched this up, and it. Do you mind like explaining how someone could overcome that?
Oh, yes. New experiences often make us feel fear that we will fall on our face and embarrass ourselves, right? That we will not meet whichever standard is out there for some reason. And I would say I learned this from Bill, which is one aspect of it is starting small. So we might want to build up to trying a completely new experience, right? Like, I would not say, I want to be a Formula One driver and immediately get into a race car, right? Like, I would probably build up to that. Like, if I don't have my driver's license, I would get that first, right? I would drive on normal roads first. So identifying what is the smallest way that we can start, so that that first step does not feel as terrifying. It has to feel challenging, but it doesn't need to feel absolutely terrifying all the time. So then in small steps, we can build up. And then the other part of it is that the word failure is very interesting, where failure sometimes can feel like it has this finality to it. Like, I failed and therefore I cannot do that again, but that is not the case, right? Every time we can reevaluate, and if we want to, if we feel enough passion about that area, we can think about what else could I have done differently, so I can set up a new experiment and explore whether that will produce a different result than what I just got. And then I find it interesting to evaluate for ourselves, and this differs for every person, how much of that feeling of failure is about internal or external drivers. So sometimes the failure can be about being seen as having failed. So it's embarrassing for someone to see me fall on my face. And then we have to think about who are these people who are looking? What assumptions am I making? Maybe actually when they see me fall, actually it inspires them and they think, wow, she fell and she didn't die. So it's actually inspiring, and they're not disgusted by that. So really questioning the assumptions behind why we have these thoughts, and then being able to match that back to, how does that relate to my values? Like, do I want to be someone who looks perfect to everyone in my life? Like, is that of value to me? And if it is, why is that? Like, and I keep diving deeper until we get to what's fundamentally driving us, so that we can connect back to, are we actually willing to take some failures in order to get to our truest, deepest values?
And a follow-up for that, like I've heard like advice, right, on two places or on two different sides of the spectrum. One, like a piece of advice I've heard is like always go follow your dream, that kind of thing, right? But the other is also being realistic. So how do you kind of balance the two to make sure that you're still living a healthy lifestyle, that you're not pushing yourself, but also, exploring that kind of experimental kind of part?
It's very helpful for me to be able to think through the different aspects of my life, because I have found for myself, it's rarely that enjoyable to be 100% only, let's say, succeeding at work, but then health and all other aspects are not doing well. So for each of us, we will have different parts of our portfolio that matter to different extents. And again, we have to create that tapestry for ourselves. There's no reason why our setup has to be the same as anyone else's. There's no correct answer. So first is evaluating what are the different aspects, whether it's, I really care about building connections with friends, and that's a key driver in my life, or I really care about having an innovative effect on climate change. And then being very true to our values in how we make all of this happen. So this means that, for instance, if you want to have an effect on climate change, there are many ways you can do that, right? You can invest in a company that is doing this work. You can be an employee. You can be an entrepreneur and experiment on some concepts related to it. You can be a journalist and highlight climate change. You can be a performer, an artist, and draw awareness about the topic. So there are so many strategies. There are tens of thousands of strategies to achieve any end. And when we can stay aware of that and be flexible, as well as not be judgmental for leaning towards a specific strategy versus another, then we can create choice for ourselves, where we can say, I want to work towards this goal through a particular strategy that speaks to me, as opposed to through a strategy that other people have told, for instance, have told me that is the way to go. And then that helps to alleviate some of the internal conflict while we're still able to keep going for our goals.
Yeah. So yeah. Okay. So you kind of mentioned networking there, and I know that networking is like really important to kind of gain a good group around you so you can bounce off ideas and become successful. But I feel like it's not that easy for people, like maybe for people who like skip college and just don't go, because I know college is where kind of you build networking and like people you want to be around. So how do you suggest people can like build a decent group of people around them so that they can make moves?
First is openness and curiosity. So we can learn from people of all walks of life. I found that to be so true in my life, whether it's I can learn from both people who are older and younger, people more junior, more senior. I can learn from people from all different countries who have expertise, not in any topic that seems related to what I'm doing, but actually there are lessons that I can still transfer over. So being open-minded helps, as opposed to being very pigeonholed that I have to meet someone who looks exactly like this persona that I have in my mind. And then in terms of nurturing those connections, curiosity is very helpful because it helps us to understand on a deeper level what each of these people that we want to connect with is about. So if we understand what are they feeling, where do they need help, what drives them and what they do, these all help us to have better conversations. And better conversations over time leads to stronger relationships where these people will think of you, they will consider you someone who's close to them, they will want to help you. So those are two very fundamental aspects, openness and curiosity, that can't go wrong generally in helping us manage any human relationship.
I know earlier you were talking about like job wise, right? How you moved from the econ world more to the tech world. I wanted to ask first, like what prompted the change and how has the tech world and being in a tech position impacted your life?
When I was working in a bank, I had opportunities to do work that made me see how technology was such an important driver in what was changing about our industry. For instance, I helped to build a product that was used by small businesses in order to receive payments from their customers. And I ended up doing a lot of user experience focused work in that time. For instance, I mapped out the flow through the process of how a user would use the product, which included a mobile application. And I really had to think from the perspective of small businesses, which I, at that time, was not very familiar with what it's like to be a small business owner. And then I really got attracted to this idea of building a customer-centric experience and also being able to experiment. Because I worked on a mobile app, right? We could change, like if we figured out this interaction was not very successful and slowed down the customer being able to do what they wanted to do, then we could change that. And so that agility was really fascinating to me. And I wanted to experience working in a space where that was very much the norm. So I had some inspirations that I drew from that experience that I wanted to work in technology and help build customer centric products. And then in terms of how working in tech has impacted my life, it has helped me to meet really interesting people. It has been experience for me to grow my skills, whether it's product management, design, understanding how to work with stakeholders, having empathy with engineers. So I've gained so many skills and honed different experiences. And then the idea of iteration has been widely applicable in other aspects of my life. So whether that's with how we talked about career flexibility, experimenting on our own lives, but also experimenting in how we change our habits and helping friends to think through how they can change different parts of their life. This mindset of being iterative and responding to feedback has been so useful in all aspects of life.
I have a quick question. So about your transition to technology, did you feel like that was a huge commitment for you, or how similar was your job before to what you wanted to do after?
You could say both that they were similar, the jobs I had before and after the transition, and also very different. So they were similar in the sense that I continued to use the analytics skills I had developed working with data and telling stories with data. They were different in the sense that right after I worked at a bank, I worked at an enterprise software company, and some of our products are software products that are used by engineers to do testing and development. So it was a very different domain. What was still common though was that I needed to use my ability to learn quickly. And so that's been so helpful to have that continuously be challenged and for me to keep honing that skill, because I've since built tech products in many different industries, such as real estate and education, and that ability to learn quickly and empathize with really different users and customers has been really useful.
Okay, so yeah, I know Ishaan just kind of asked you about like the transition from tech, and I was just wondering, like, if you were you ever interested in like what other career choices were you like looking towards? Because I know you were always like fascinated about that mental health conversation, tech obviously, and I know you mentioned real estate. So was there anything else in particular that kind of enticed you?
Sure. I briefly considered being a doctor at one point. I considered being a lawyer, these typical, I see your head nods, these typical professions that are touted. I, even within tech, have thought about different roles. I've thought about being an engineer instead of being a product manager. I, at one point, experimented with what if I looked into being a designer instead of being in product. And then I've had the chance to explore roles that are not really described well with just a title. So there have been times when, for instance, I built products for internal use, like for infrastructure and data. And so you could say that maybe they were more like analytics heavy roles. And so I've come to know that not only are there many different types of jobs, but even within what we think of as one type of job, there are many different flavors of it. And so now I'm very comfortable with, we can have many different ideas for what we want to do, and we can continue to try them to create a mix that works for us. And I'm definitely very curious about what the next generation, like what types of jobs are popular and what do people aspire to be now.
Yeah. So yeah, all of those like different career choices that you were possibly going to go into. Considering that like all of them require like different skills, because I know you mentioned skills, like you keep on bringing skills up. Like, what are, just on the mental health side though, what are like the top 3 skills someone can use to like maintain a good mental state?
One is awareness. So means noticing what is going on in our environment and also inside of us. So noticing when we have certain feelings, what exactly those feelings are. Do we have feelings about having those feelings and so forth? So being cognizant of the information that we're getting from our bodies, from everything that is going on. That's one. 2 is curiosity for me. So having a mindset that asks questions, that always wants to know one level deeper why or how, and then being able to act on that curiosity to pose those questions. That's where we get into communication. So it's really important for mental health. I would say the third one I would bring up is communicating with the other people we have in our lives, whether it's our family, friends, teachers, bosses. When we are curious and we want to act on it, for instance, how do we approach someone and have that be a productive conversation where we are actually finding out more information about each other so that we can understand each other better, work better together. So those are communication skills that involve everything from the tactical aspects of maybe the tone of voice and different uses of language, but also being aware of the other person's response and having a sense of the unspoken rules and having empathy for their experience. So those are 3 that are very substantive and that I continue to grow in, because many people can always do better in all of them.
Okay, I think now we're just gonna wrap it up. I think thanks for answering these questions like very well. They were very insightful. Thank you for coming on and giving us your time. So I think we can end it here.
Thank
That's
you
fine with you.
all.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Yep.